Share. Hi, everyone. Welcome tonight. We are talking bees. Imagine that. So, there's been a lot going on, and there's a lot starting north of us in the upper United States, Canada, and other places around the world. So, let us know where you're visiting from, if you will. Tonight's chat is just a pure Q&A. So, if you have questions, whether it's about small hive beetles, whether it's about stuff that I don't know, insulated hives, all those kinds of things. We'll take as many questions as we can and just go from one question to the next. We've had a lot of interesting guests in the past, and of course having Bob and Ian and having a few others as well, like Corey Stevens, has been a lot of fun. But it's hard to get to all the questions that everybody has, and this is a busy time of the year. So let's try to get to a bunch of questions tonight. And thanks for letting me know where you're from. Lots of folks from all over the country on already popping in. Hey, things Cayman doesn't know would feel quite a thick book. Yeah, I know, but books isn't the thing anymore, and no one wants to watch a YouTube video that long. Hey, Cayman, how is your honey flow going? Great question. It has been interesting. If we can get a good push out of the sumac, late clover, and a little basswood, we'll have a good year. If we don't, it'll be a little bit subpar. Privet underperformed again this year. Black locust really didn't do so hot, and the clover just really has not showed up this year, which has been a problem. We've had some cooler weather. It's quite cool today. It feels like Indiana weather for May. It's quite cool. So anyhow, every year is different. It's not a bad year, but we'll see how it finishes. The next 10 days will really tell all here. Oklahoma, Philippines, good to have you all on. Oregon, Illinois, Baltimore, California. Seems last minute, but I was on the porch watching bee videos anyways. Spoken like a true beekeeping addict. It is last minute, and I wasn't planning on doing one today. However, I thought, well, a lot of us are in this area not doing a whole lot with our bees today because it is quite cool. And I really forgot it was a vacation weekend. I've never had a job where we observed this day. I mean, it's not that we didn't observe it, but they never gave it to us off, right? So when I was truck driving, we still worked on that day. And when you're beekeeping, you still do. However, I want to say a big thank you to all of our servicemen and women out there. My brother's in the Air Force, and his mustache is a little rough to look at, but we are very proud of him otherwise. Too much Top Gun. Texas, more goobers than a 10,000-acre peanut farm. A lot of those down in Texas, and definitely the biggest ones. Yeah, overcast and chilly here, and that's the thing. Like today, if it was 80 degrees and sunny, or even 75, the bees would be bringing in nectar. We just came off of a couple of days where the bees were bringing in a lot of sumac nectar into the hives to where you could shake it. And so if we get a couple of days like this, that's just days that we're missing out, and that can really influence, especially if it's during like the peak bloom. Sometimes those peak bloom days of blackberry and other things like that in a day, the bees can bring in 10 pounds of nectar or more. So, having a few days of that is a decent substantial loss. I don't know what's the temperature right now. Yeah, it's saying 60 degrees, 59 degrees Fahrenheit is where we're at in overcast. So for us this time of the year, that is quite cool. Wonder how much longer the flow will go on in Memphis, Stephen R. So that's a rough question for me to answer because Memphis is two different zones, and part of the area of Memphis is, I think, two zones different from where I'm at, which is really surprising, but it is. The Delta, all that Mississippi River provides a lot of a buffer from the cooler weather. And also you guys have a lot different plants diversity. You have different diversity down there, and you have a lot of agriculture. So I don't know what part of it you're in, but Gus Mitchell would be a great one to ask. Typically, from talking to him for over a decade, his flows go into late July. and mine end by mid-June. Very rarely do they go past that. So you might still have quite a bit more time, especially if you have cotton or a lot of soybean and some of the other stuff that they have that grow along the riverbank. So I don't really know, Stephen, but you may still have a good bit of flow ahead, and definitely be watching to keep those honey supers and some space on. Kama, what do you think about horizontal long hives being the best hive for bees? I've seen your videos about it too. Great question. So thanks for joining us from the Philippines. And there's nothing wrong with the hives at all. Is from a are they good for the bees, bad for the bees standpoint. My bees have thrived in them. The biggest problem I see with them is some of the techniques that I enjoy with the Langstroth system, the regular system that we have, is I can't just go and take off a super. I also can't pick up the bottom box and look for swarm cells. I can't rotate chambers around if I feel like it's necessary. I don't do that a ton, like all year round, but there are certain times where it's useful. So you're kind of limited to individual frame manipulations. That's not a big deal if you're just doing a handful of them. I think once you start looking at dozens of these things, that's when it really starts becoming a problem. Or if you have devices like you're wanting to use a fume board. It's not that impossible to use a fume board, but any of the things that are built around a typical Langstroth system become a little bit more interesting or just don't work with the horizontal. So that's the only issue I see with it. We've produced 160 pounds out of the one hive that we have over 2 years, and whatever we get this year. So it's been very productive. I wouldn't say it's been any more productive, but it's been fun too. And for folks that want to build their own and can build those, or that have back problems, they make a lot of sense. So I'm definitely not trying to poo-poo it at all, but there's just pros and cons with it. And they're a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed mine quite a bit. It's neat to open it up and be able to see all the frames. I think one of the things that I would say, though, is don't build it any less than 40 frames. I've seen some that are like 30 frames, and I just think that's too small. If you have a really productive queen, she's going to need more room than that. Obviously, the brood can stay within a 10 to 12 frame space, but if there's a good honey flow, they're going to need some room to expand and move that. So I think you have to watch it with the swarming just a hair more, but I'd like to see more people get into that, just because I think they would enjoy it, and it's fun. I've definitely enjoyed mine. Okay, getting to some more questions. William, how do hives, oh, and thank you, by the way, William. I really appreciate that, and thanks for coming on. How do hives that have lost their queen and they raise, how do hives that lost their queen and they raise their own queen, how do they raise brood eventually after mating flight without nurse bees? So, good question. So, essentially, we have a hive that is getting some pretty old bees. A new queen comes back, though, eventually, thank goodness. And how do they get brood going? It's tricky. If they're not too far along, and they can still revert back to a degree, but they're very unproductive in comparison. It's hard for them to raise a lot of brood, and it's a lot easier if there's a lot of good nutrition coming in. If there's a lot of nutrition either in the hive or if there's a good flow, they can do it. They can revert back to a degree and create some jelly, but it's difficult, and they're just not near as productive as a nurse bee if they're all very old. Also, there could be some of the bees that never graduated maybe all the way. Maybe they save a few back. I don't know. It depends on how long they've been without brood. I do know once they get long in the tooth like that, though, it's kind of a 50-50 thing. The best thing to fix that, as it is in this case that you're describing, is to really have a virgin queen go on out and come back in and go through the whole process. They're much more accepting of that than for you to buy a mated queen and then try to introduce her. They definitely perform and accept that one better, because sometimes they'll do this even with the queen that they raise. They'll bring, that queen will come back, they'll let her lay for a couple frames, 2-3 frames, and maybe it's because they're out of balance. I don't know why. they will start drawing queen cells, and a virgin will hatch out, kill that queen, even if she appears to be a good laying queen, and then start the process. The problem of it is it's another roll of the dice. Is this new queen going to go back and mate and come back? And so it can be a little interesting. But from what I read off of your question, they are able to revert back to a degree, but it's still it's a tight thing there, and a lot of times it doesn't work. When bees get out of balance, especially during a dearth, it's a tricky situation. A lot of times, if we don't have a queen cell, we never waste a queen that's mated on a colony that has no brood and is very, very old. We'll just combine them back and make a good split. Or, like I said, make a good split, because you're using a bunch of young brood, young nurse bees, and it's like a 90-something% chance of success versus a 50-50 at best. Elizabeth says, I'm in Middle Tennessee. I feel like my new bees packaged in nukes got a really late start. Not sure if I should be going for them to fill a honey super at this point. So I don't know exactly how big they are, but one of the goals that I always had when I was starting new packages or nukes was to get them to double deeps by July if possible. And sometimes that requires feeding. So you're in Middle Tennessee. Right now the flow is not at its peak. There is a flow going on, but we have cool days like today where they're consuming more than what they're bringing in definitely today. And when there's a peak flow like blackberry blossom, tulip poplar converging all at once, there's just so much coming in. But right now, if the colonies are drawing combs out and they still have more to draw, a little bit of thin syrup would be good. If you're trying to get some honey, obviously you wouldn't want to do that, but there's not a whole lot of productive flow left in most parts of Tennessee, especially Middle Tennessee. There are exceptions to that, but typically my flow is done by the 14th of June. So any splits that we made that are increased colonies, I have some nukes that are about 4 frames strong for myself that I'm keeping. They are going into 10 frame equipment right now, and we're feeding them. It doesn't matter if there's a little bit of a flow, because it's not crazy strong, and we want them to draw a foundation. And one of the things I want to tell you guys, and the more I've experimented with this, the more that I have found that it really helps me out, is to get a good wax coat. And so I've been waxing some of this old foundation that I've had for a few years, and you can see where I've put on a nice coat, and it's not a ton. You don't really need a bunch down into the cell itself. Actually, I think that's a lot more work for the bees. Just roll it on with one of these rollers right here. You can get like 800 sheets, 1,000 sheets with a roller easily, and put beeswax on it. It makes a huge difference. They draw it out faster, or better yet, you can get some Premier foundation. There's some other companies that put on a thick coat if you ask for it, but Premier is always, in my experience, put on a nice thick coat on there, and it really makes a difference on the speed of which they draw it. And I personally think that a good wax coat is worth every penny, because if they draw it out faster, it's going to retard swarming. Combs are the second most valuable thing in your operation. Muddy Creek Pines, 100% learned everything I know from you and just trying stuff. Well, I appreciate that. We definitely don't know everything here, so I hope that you learned some good stuff. But I appreciate you saying so. And we definitely learned a lot from other beekeepers. A lot of my information comes from guys and gals smarter than me and just trying to pass it on. But hope that you have a great beekeeping season, Muddy Creek Pines. All right. And if I missed your question, just say it again. I'm trying to get to them all. I'll try to be a little bit more speedy. Nature's Image Farm. Hey, Greg Burns. Hope you guys are doing good up there and having a great season yourself. Really appreciate you coming on to the live chat and donating. Hope you guys are going to have a good Memorial weekend with your family and friends. Let's see here. Shane Williams, Cayman, happy race day from Andy. That's right. I had a package kill the queen that came with them. I requeened it. Any tips if they'll kill the new queen as well? Don't know. I just don't know. But packages do have a history of problems, and there's a lot of reasons for this. But it's not too unheard of for a package to, after a little while, supersede their queen. Sometimes you'll get one that's just like crazy awesome, and then you'll get some that just don't seem to really get with it, and then you'll have some that lay really good for a couple months, and then they get superseded. And I've had that before, and if they bring the daughter back properly, a lot of times they're way better than the mother because they were able to mate really, really well with the diverse amount of drones in your area. And there is something to localized genetics to a degree, but really I feel like it's more about having a queen raised in a small situation as opposed to like she's competing with 1,000 other queens at a time amongst so many drones, and it's a higher stress situation. Your queen's being raised in the right conditions. So keep me posted on that, Shane, and let me know how that works out for you. But the best thing to do is when there's a virgin, you know that there's some queen cells and there's going to be a virgin running through the hive over the next week or so, just give them some time. If you see a capped queen cell, you know they're queenless and you got to wait at least a few, 18 to 20 days. Honestly, I usually recommend 3 weeks. 21 days from capped queen cell. It's not that she won't be laying prior to that, but in 21 days you should have a queen or a laying queen, or you don't. But just keep an eye on it because you don't want to wait too long, and then they get long in the tooth. Hey Lynn, I'm extracting this coming week. My broodminder scale tells me my 8 frame weighs 242 pounds. I totally credit to Canadian rocket fuel pollen patties I picked up at Hive Life. Oh, well, they are pretty good. The best thing is the bees eat them really well, and I think that's the main thing. There's some patties I've used, and you get a lot of debris in the bottom board, and these, they just really seem to eat them very clean and very well, and that's always a good sign. Back when I was raising chickens, I learned that lesson. If the chickens are eating good and fast and they look clean, that's all you really need to know. And if the bees look shiny and healthy and productive and they're eating the food good, that's a really good sign. Hansberry honeybees pulling honey in the cool weather and spitting rain. The bees are not warm and fuzzy. No, bee suits are my best friend during days like today. I actually took the day off though, and it's kind of, well, this is fun. This doesn't count as bee work right here. This is pleasure. Hey Brenda, have you ever tried the Nico or Nicot system? Depends on who you are. To make queens. Was thinking of doing it with my top bars and getting some nukes for starters and finishers. I personally have never used it. I know people who do, and some of them are professional beekeepers. Unfortunately, they don't have really any videos or instructional things about it, but they're very successful. And if I remember correctly, raise about 1,500 queens with that system. I'm sure it's doable because I've seen their queens from it. I just really don't have any tips or tricks for it. I would get a lot of information before doing it. I don't think it's going to be any easier than grafting by the time you calculate how much it's going to take you to set up. I could be wrong, but you can make that system work. I just don't really know what to tell you on how to do that. Spirited Toe waxed some the other day. Special crock pot from the dollar store. Yes, you can keep it really inexpensive. This crock pot is a family heirloom that I have. Oh goodness! And this thing has been around. It looks like it's been around. Still works though, and it is full of beeswax. Let's see if I can get the lid off. Yeah. So we got a lot of our own beeswax, and ooh, that smells good. And so a lot of times I'll be in here. I thought about doing it during a live chat, but half the time I can't even function properly without trying to do some of this at the same time. So I'm like, that ain't happening. Oh, that is But it really makes a huge difference. I've talked to some guys that run over 10,000 colonies, and they wax their own, and they're just like, it speeds things up. If you're trying to get combs drawn in a dearth period, makes a big difference. Especially, a strong colony that's got a good, strong queen that's laying hard, a lot of bees, they don't need it as much. I mean, they still benefit from it, but they don't need it as much. It's the little colonies that really benefit the most from it. Patrick Wood says, this cool spell caused my bees to expel a lot of drones and pull out drone comb. Is that normal for May? I wouldn't think so, Patrick. I mean, it shouldn't be, and I don't know where you're located. So in Tennessee, it hasn't been that much of a cold spell to be seeing that kind of retrenching. Now, if you're further north and it's more extreme, maybe something like that. If they have reserves, decent reserves, they'll plunder that at this point before they go into that. So I would investigate into that colony and see, are they light on stuff. I mean, that seems a little weird to me. If you find out the answer to that, please let me know in a future live chat. We pick up a few bad habits from Cayman too. I had someone the other day say they say fix it now. Sorry, I'll try to fix that. Hey, we have Pierce Beekeeping from California, so I'm hoping to be able to do a video on one of their products soon. I've actually got it right here, so if you watch today's video, we were showing you some of the comb honey that we made, and I've got a Pierce comb cutter down here, which was being demonstrated at Hive Life, and I'm really excited to be able to just cut that out and drop it into some containers and give it as gifts to family, because I've never produced comb honey, 21 years, never done it before, so really looking forward to seeing that. Southern California Beekeeper, hey Cayman, have you finalized the pollen patty recipe using Apis Biologics? So basically, I don't have a video for that. I do have a video on how to make pollen patties with syrup, and then I have one how to make pollen patties using sugar as the base and using some oils. It's not as ideal because even if you use an oil, linseed oil, coconut oil, vegetable oil, if you're trying to keep the expenses down low, sugar just wants to dry out to a degree. And so I've got the Michael Palmer recipe and a few other things, but they eventually will want to dry out. But if you can go to like the playlist, you'll see the videos. And then if you just look on the back of the Apis Biologics, you can pour that in to the recommended dose. And I mix it in with Ultra B dry sub, which is what I use when I buy the dry. Thanks for the donation again, Southern California Beekeeper. So sorry I don't have a video on that. I'm way behind on videos. Hey, Cayman, what's your preferred method of requeening an aggressive colony with a mated queen? So, that one's a little bit interesting. So, aggressive colonies do seem to be a little more stubborn when it comes to accepting a queen. But if there's a decent flow going on, and they're in good shape, they will accept one. Sometimes what I like to do, though, is remove the queen, the old queen, of course, and then we're going to put that introduced queen in between a couple frames of emerging brood if possible, even if it's just one frame of emerging brood, because we want them to come out and we want them to get around that queen, and we want it to definitely be in a nurse bee area. So having some frames of larvae close by would be good too. We want the gentle bees to be around the queen and to eventually start liking her and want to spread her pheromone, all that kind of stuff. And typically I won't pull the cork immediately. I will go ahead and leave her in there for 2 days, and then I will come back 2 days later, and then I'll pull the cork and then let them do the candy release. And I don't smoke them when I come back the second time, so I'm fully suited. That's just an aggressive colony. And then I feed them if there's not a flow going on. And then I don't come back for a good 8 to 10 days at the earliest, because I want her to get out and start laying before we get in there. So that's how I do it. But honestly, I've gotten away from a lot of mated queen introductions. That's the minority of my introductions. Since we raise a lot of our own queen cells, typically, if we introduce a mated queen, it's with a plug-in package of she was in a mating nuke, 3 to 4 frames of bees, 2 frames of bees minimum, and we plug that in, so she's already got her whole little cohort of followers. And then if we're not plugging them in like that, typically we're introducing a queen cell, which is way better accepted. And they're totally cool with a virgin coming on out, going on a mating flight, coming back. So I love raising queens. It's a little bit of work, but it really is worth it. Cayman, are you seeing sumac open in your area? Catawba trees, full bloom here. Persimmon is getting hit really hard right now. We're definitely seeing some sumac here. Not all of it's bloomed out yet, but it's going. Hey, Matt Kirkland, I want to say a big thank you for donating yet again. When are you coming back to Texas? I don't know. I haven't been invited back. But right now, I actually have. I'm in talks with a group for 2024, like March of 2024. So I might be in Texas, and if I do end up doing that, I'll let you know, Matt, for sure. It was good seeing you guys at the TBA last year. Now I will be in Illinois, Quincy, Illinois. They've got a big conference going up there. Bunch of interesting people going to be there, and I think we're going to be playing some bluegrass too, so that'll be quite fun. Where's a good place to purchase some beeswax? There's a website called Bee Source, and it's an old forum, and it's not used as much as it used to be, but there's a guy on there called Honey Householder or something like that is his handle, whatever it is, and he sells beeswax at a really reasonable price. And you can get beeswax from some of the bee supply stores, but you typically pay a premium. It just depends on how much you're buying too. Okay. Let's see here. Trying to go up and get a couple questions that I may have missed. Came and have a queenless hive, has a laying worker now. Can I just stick a queen in there, cage her? How long before releasing her? Hey, Whit Davis, like I've said before, I'm not sure if I said it today, though, I don't like trying to fix laying worker colonies unless I can introduce a virgin queen or a queen cell. If you buy a queen and you're spending $35, $40 or more with shipping, whatever it is, it's a high-risk situation throwing them into a laying worker colony. And so I don't know if that's the only colony that you have. So if it is, that's the only option that you have. But if you have another colony or two, I would strongly recommend just making a split off of the good ones. Go into those big colonies or those other colonies that are well balanced. Take a frame of calf brood. Take maybe another frame of calf brood from the other ones. The adhering bees. Give them a couple shakes of bees. Give them a frame of food with the adhering bees on that frame or two. And then give them a couple foundations or however you want to do it, combs if you got it. And then give them a little bit of light feed. And then stick the queen down in there. And that's going to be a really good environment to introduce a queen to, very successful. And you are going to just combine the laying workers with another colony. You'll do the paper combine, slow combine with one of your strong, good colonies that's in good shape. I've had nothing but very poor success personally trying to introduce a laying queen that I've purchased or raised, even the ones that I've raised that I know are very good queens, into a laying worker situation. It's not impossible to fix, but if you were to fix it, typically you have to give them a couple frames of brood and then introduce the queen into that laying working colony. And by the time I feel like you've done the things that you need to possibly fix it, you could have just made a split anyways. So these days the only time we try to fix it if it's early on and we have queen cells, and we'll drop a queen cell in a laying worker, because it's just a high risk for a queen that we've put all that work into getting that queen to a mating and laying, and now we're going to throw her in an environment that's pretty high risk. So sorry if that's not easy for you to do, but that's my experience. Is I will not use a mated queen in a lane worker situation. I want to say a big thank you to Bazemore Farms. I don't think I've seen you on before, but we appreciate you coming on. And if you have any questions, hit us with it, and we'll try to get to it. And thank you so much. Hey, Cayman, how often are you adding new genetics queens from different breeders in your apiary? Not too often. I did try some Corey Stephen queens last year, and that's been a big question that people have asked a bunch. And they have been productive. They have been very productive. They are Italians, more than what I have, which I prefer something a little bit more carny. And so that's one thing that I'm trying to steer away from, just because I want the brood break in November and December every time. But they've been very productive for me, and so I tried those. They were great. I typically buy from Michael Palmer or Bob Benny every now and then to see if I can pull a breeder or a queen or two from them. So we'll run them a couple years and see what's really good out of the lot, and whatever's the best, we'll use that for a drone mother, or if it's really exceptional, a queen mother, and along with ours. So we kind of mix things in there, but we don't introduce a lot of stuff. I really like Michael Palmer's queens quite a bit, and Bob Benny's also, which half the time they're his genetics that have come from Chris Werner down in Florida. So, but we don't add it every year. Most of the time they're my queens, and we just pick the best of the best. It's really not that hard. No tolerance for disease, no tolerance for aggressive behavior, no tolerance for running all over the combs when it's not necessary. And it's a lot easier when you have hundreds of hives to pick from too, right? So, but don't let that daunt you from doing it yourself. I mean, if you have 4 hives and one of them stands out from the rest, graft from that one if you have the skill, and you'll be very happy with the results. By and large, very happy. That's how I used to do it, and it worked great. All right, Stephen R. Best stuff to use on fume boards when removing. Thanks for the donation, Stephen. And so as far as that goes, there's several products out there. You can use the butyric acid honey robber. That will run anything away. I think it should be probably classified as an act of terrorism. It's mustard gas, I'm sure, is worse, but it can't be much farther away from it. Honey robber is terrible. To put in the words of Gus Mitchell, it smells like cheese vomit, and unfortunately, he's not wrong. So it's nasty. But that will clear everything and anything. I don't use it because I don't want to smell it, and I had a guy I know that spilled some in the back of a vehicle, and he'll never be able to sell that to anybody. Let me put it that way. So I use Honey Bandit typically. And there's a couple other products that are very similar. They're not quite as good at clearing. They're still good at clearing. I feel like I don't feel like. I know I have to use more product to get them to clear. And I also, I take a bee blower with me. So the fume board gets the majority of it, about 90%, sometimes more. And then we'll have a battery-powered blower, and then we'll blow the rest of the bees out. And so that works really good for us. But the Honey Bandit is the one that I use. T-Mart, need Texas Bee Supply to restock the extra large size super suits I would like. Yeah, I mean, they are a good suit. I'm very, very happy with the one Laurel and I got. I've got a guy that's helping me, and I recommended that he get one of those because they're really durable. There's a lot of bee suits. I've seen a lot of brands now. A lot of companies send me them to review. A lot of them, most of them never make it onto YouTube because they just stink. And we won't put that stuff on our YouTube channel, but these truly are the heaviest suit, full suit I've ever wore. I prefer the full suit over the jacket. I've got another jacket, but these days I'm just throwing the full suit on because the way that the super suit is, it's so easy to jump in and out of it. And we're beekeeping at such a fast pace now. I just go ahead and throw it on because I can't tell you how many times I have bees crawl up my loose pants. I usually wear 511 pants, and they keep you a lot cooler. But if I wear a bee suit, I can just wear a pair of shorts. And now I actually think I'm cooler wearing the bee suit with the shorts versus just wearing the pants. So yeah, I've spent more time in a bee suit in the last year than probably the previous 8 years combined. And it's primarily because I tried out the super suit and I've really, really liked it. Yeah, Drunken Bee says, hey, 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 happy Memorial Day, all. And just like we said earlier, we really appreciate all of our veterans. Truly, we are blessed to live in a country where we have the freedoms to be able to talk all this bee stuff and be able to enjoy these days. It is a blessing, and I'd like to say a big thanks to my brother Hayden. And like I said earlier, we're really proud of him. Just got to get rid of that Top Gun mustache. Cayman, will a hive that is a day away from swarming be very defensive? Ran into one, and they were very mean one day, then swarmed and are now gentle again. Never ran into that before. Swarms are a mixed bag of nuts. So there's some swarms that you get. I mean, they're just so calm. I mean, it's like you could almost squeeze them to death, and they wouldn't do anything. They're just really calm. And that's been my experience more often than not. But then there was the case where I didn't have a bee suit that day. I'm like, it'll be fine. And I shook that swarm off right into a box and received about 18 to 20 stings. It was really hard to count how many of them because there were so many of them in my hair, and we couldn't find them all. And my heart was racing that day. And I think I broke a record. I got short legs, but that was some fast running right there. I got those bees though. I got them. No suit. Took a lot of stings, and I don't know how to explain why they were so aggressive. That's not typical. So you just have to be careful, and that's why we try to not recommend anybody do any crazy stuff because I can get stung 18 times and survive the tell-to-tell. There might be just one person that watches my YouTube channel that does it, and it ends up killing them, and that's not something we need. Hey, Jose's on here. Hello from North California. Cayman looking pretty fly with that polo. Thank you. Where does a handsome guy like me get one? Drop that link, my friend. I better get back to catching and caging before Kelly fires me. So Jose sells a bunch of queens in California, and he has a YouTube channel as well. Drops a lot of videos. Kelly is the boss, aka the wife, and she's from what I understand, really good at doing a lot of the queen rearing. So Jose's got a gal like I do that she keeps you on your toes because a woman like that, she's not going to tolerate you not getting it done. So you don't want to be like a drone in November, man. So thanks for the donation, Jose. And we don't actually have these for sale yet. We're going to work on getting a really nice merch line before 2024. But yeah, one more thing on the list of things to do. All right. Hey, I want to say a big thank you to Joy. Thank you for sending that donation, Joy. And if you leave a question down below, I'd love to answer it, and I'll try to see it. It's just a little bit tricky, and I know a lot of you guys are commenting with yourselves, and excuse me, and so maybe typing Cayman in capital letters at the beginning of it or something to kind of separate it out. And I'm totally cool with you all having a discussion in the chat. Sometimes it makes it a little bit more confusing. I start reading something like, oh, they're not addressing me. But we do like the camaraderie. So you're not concerning in inbreeding if you're not refreshing new genetics. Bees are really good about keeping the genetics pretty diverse. I don't do anything very closed here. There's beekeepers around me, not super close, but close enough, and they don't keep the same type of bees that I do. We also don't just have one line of queens either, and bees do a really good job at keeping themselves really diverse. We don't live on an island or anything like that. Things spread around, and And like I said, I bring some stuff in from time to time, but it's not like we have to bring something in every year or even every other year. There's been commercial operations. Charles Mraz, the late Charles Mraz, was a big proponent, and there are still guys like Charles who believe in just going into a yard of 100 colonies and finding 2, 3, or 4 colonies that really look great, and then just graft from those and just get a handful. And bees are pretty good about keeping themselves fairly diverse. I think it's when you start raising massive numbers and trying to bottleneck it intentionally, that's when you run into problems. And we don't get really, really, really particular. We obviously want the basic fundamentals, but we're not going for VSH directly. We're not going for any color of queens. I'll have queens that are solid black. I'll have ones that are brown. I'll have ones that are raccoon-tailed. We'll have all kinds of coloration diversity in our lines, and so we're not really going for anything fancy. We just want performance, honestly. And got to say a big thank you to Brian Reese. Appreciate it. Hope everything's going good in Jersey and the bees are doing good. You guys are having a good Memorial Day weekend. Or, yeah, it is the weekend. That's right. All right, ET's Bees on. Randy the Tar-Heeled Beekeeper came. What's the latest you would try to produce queens in West North Carolina? I've produced queens as late as September, early September in Tennessee. The percentages go way down. I think there's a couple reasons for that. The nutrition hasn't been super great for a long time, and nutrition's vital to good drone quality and queen quality. And also, Varroa is a big influence on this. And one of the things that is going on right now, a lot of us have drones, and so they're taking the majority of the abuse. They're getting a lot of the viruses that are going to be injected right now. They're getting the mites going into their cells because they vastly prefer drones. And so when we start getting into August and September, and bees, because there's less nutrition, they don't rear as many drones. And what drones they do rear, if they have the colonies have decent mite loads, they're just getting thrashed at that point. And so you don't have as many viable drones. And so I typically try not to raise queens after July. It's not that we can't, but that's as late as I go, because it's really a percentage thing, and I just don't get really great percentages, I feel like, for my time after late July. It's still doable, and I think I could do well enough with it, but I just try to get it over when it's easy. And these days I'm just trying to make my splits and my queens during the easiest parts of the season, because why not? So you probably in West North Carolina could do it as late August and probably be fine, as long as there's enough good drones to get it done. Rob Hopper, can you recommend a brand or features I need for my first OA vaporizer? I just can't justify the instant VAP for my 5 hives. I totally get it. I totally get that. So there's several products out there. The company that distributes Instant VAP also sells their vaporizers, the Laura Bee vaporizer, and so they have the original model, and they have the one that goes in through the front door. Those are less. I think they're $200 odd, if I'm not mistaken, $275. I cannot remember. It's been a while since I've looked, but those are good units. There are some cheaper models out there, but if it's a pan vaporizer, it's almost worth it to just go ahead and jump. I'm not a pan vaporizer fan. There's guys I know that have burned through their bottom boards and caught their hives on fire with those suckers, and they're just so slow. I'm sure you can use it properly, but I don't know. It seems like it wouldn't take long for a faster model to get it done. So probably look for one it's probably going to be around $200 odd to get one that hooks up to an electrical cord, but that would probably be your best bet. Be very skeptical. There's a lot of knockoff Chinese companies that are coming out there on Facebook and different platforms, and they look pretty legit. But if you know enough about vaporizers and where the nozzle is supposed to be and how things hook up, they actually are made to fail. But the Chinese guys don't care about that because they just want to sell it, and then you'll never hear from them again. So I would recommend sticking to somebody in the U.S. who you can communicate with. And the Laura bee guys, Rob, who runs that, he's really good with customer service. If you have any issues, you can get a hold of him. All right, we got the Dominican beekeeper. Greetings from the Caribbean. That sounds really nice right now. It is cold here today. Cayman, do you have a link for the bee suit you recommend? Hey, Laurel, do you think you can get that for me? Got to talk to the one who knows stuff. All right, so I am about 4 minutes behind on this stuff. Is it safe to give frames that had unripe nectar from last season in them if I shake them out as best I can, or should I toss them? As long as they haven't fermented and got real nasty. Yeah, I mean, if they ferment a little bit and the combs are still strong, if you feel like, I don't really want that fermented stuff still in there, you can hose it down gently, and that'll dilute that and wash it out. And then it's easy to shake the water right out of the frames. That wouldn't be a problem. Likely, the way it is fine, but if you would feel more comfortable, you can quickly rinse that out. Just don't let the water sit in those combs because it'll absorb in and soften them, and it'll encourage fungus and mold to grow in there and that kind of stuff. The link for the Texas the bee supply suit, the super suit. Laurel's going to work on getting the link to that. Cayman, how do you juggle requeening and mite treatments in summer? So I put them together. That's how I juggle it, right? So one of the things that I've been toying around with, and I haven't got to a conclusion yet, is formic acid. So it could knock some queens out. But the argument is, with a lot of my buddies, if it knocks a queen out, is she really that good? Because unless you're doing it just like crazy high temperatures, but some of them are like, we're going to requeen them anyways. So just go ahead and crush the mites and do that. But you have to have backup queens if you're doing it in hot weather, like 90-something degree weather. So typically what we do, though, is we'll make what we call smart splits. And we'll just, let's say we're a small beekeeper wanting to stay around 5 to 10 hives, and we have 4 hives and we want to get up to 8. So we purchase 4 queens, and we just go into our, let's say they're double deep colonies, and we're just going to take all of the capped brood and go one direction with it. We're going to take all the non-capped brood. You can't divide it evenly, but you can get the majority of it and split that up. And so one of those colonies immediately has no or very little capped brood. Oxalic acid vapor, boom, hit them with it, you've cleaned it up. And typically I leave the non-capped brood with the queen. So because she's used to all the forager bees, so she's going to keep the forager bees, and she's going to keep some nurse bees to cover the larvae. And then you can treat that. Now that hive's cleaned up. Well, now you've made the split with capped brood primarily, and you can treat it immediately for any brood that is not capped yet, so you can get those mites, and then you can introduce your queen, and then it's going to take a few days for her to be released and then start laying, and then it takes 9 days for her brood to be capped. So if you wait about 10 days, 9 days after the queen's introduced, come back, she's laying good, they have very little to no capped brood, oxalic acid vapor again, and maybe come up for another cleanup. And so using a timing, it's a pain. It is really a pain to do this, but it really makes your treatments work very well, and you can requeen and get your mites. It's the closest thing to getting your cake and eating it too in beekeeping. You're putting it in the comments? Okay, Laurel is putting it down in the comments. Hey, Cayman, have you checked out my new Vaporize ET? I have not seen that. I have not seen that, ET's Bees. I might have to give that a check. Maybe send me a link or something like that. Them Raccoon tail. She's got some birthing hips. I love the look of a raccoon tail queen. The only problem with them is because they have that kind of stripe pattern and they're darker, they are harder to spot than like a nice yellow Italian queen. Laurel's looking at me. Funny. All right. So she just dropped that comment. So right here, guys and gals, if you want to just look at that, or if you're interested, the super suits, they are 4 times thicker than some of the companies that have sent me bee suits on the durability of the mesh. They still breathe really well, but I want something that's going to last me years. I've put hundreds of hours into mine. It doesn't even show any signs of wearing out. And it's very easy to, even if I have muck boots on, to keep my muck boots on and just unzip it and then zip it right back up. I really like the durability of the suit. It's made for commercial operators to be able to get them for their employees and them to wear them out and for them to last a long time. I think if a hobby beekeeper took good care of it, I don't see why it can't last, a decade. I don't see why not. Came a $100 donation if Laurel comes on live. You don't know what you're asking, man. That's a lot. But I do appreciate it. She's busy working while I'm playing in here with you guys, getting to run my mouth, which she will tell you is not work. Ooh, but it does require water. Cayman, how many colonies are you up to now? Actually, the probably the right terminology would be, Cayman, how many colonies are you down to now? So we've been selling quite a few nukes. I've got a handful more to sell, and I will be, I've got a bunch of people already ordering, so I don't think I can take any more orders. Oh gosh, but we're a little under 300 and hoping to get down to 200 by the end of July. I'm going to sell nukes. I might be selling singles before too long as well. So we're just going to see how that goes. But I really don't want to be above 200 going into next year. I like having more bees than that, but with Hive Life just dominating our emails and the questions and all that stuff, something's got to give. But we don't want to get away from beekeeping. We got too many honey customers, and I love it too much to get rid of it. How long would you wait for a potential mating flight to be successful or not? So if we're raising our own queens, I drop them in on day 10. So they should emerge in around 2 days, day and a half, give or take. So there's a lot of variables. I have seen queens come back and lay with just a little over a week from the time I dropped them. So about 8 or 9 days. However, that's not normal. Typically, nothing ever goes that good. And I don't want to be in them that early either. So there's a lot of times I'll do these things to learn, but it's really not good to disrupt the colonies at this point. I definitely don't use smoke during these transition periods of her starting to lay. But if I'm going to drop a cell, there's no reason to come back any earlier than 15 days if it's a ripe cell. And that's plenty early enough. I mean, going to 21 days would be fine. In 21 days, even if you have some bad weather, you either have a laying queen or you don't. But then you need to do something immediately, or they could go laying worker on you and start messing the combs up a little bit. So recombine them back or give them a frame of larvae, and that will eliminate that laying worker tendency, because those good healthy brood pheromones will completely retard that laying worker tendency. Chris, are you on? I didn't click that. Yeah, I see you now. Okay, the Hive Life wizard is in the back room finagling all the hardware. Just finished up our first round of grafting. Thanks for all the great info, Cayman. It's 80 and sunny here in Wisconsin today. What? You guys are warmer than we are up there? How's that work? Gotta love it. Hope you have really good success, and if you don't, just keep at it. My first round of grafting was a 0. Second one was 0, and then The next one, I ended up with like, I don't know, 9, 13 of some odd low number like that. And I let one of them emerge and kill all the rest of them. But I ended up with one really awesome queen out of 3 rounds of grafting. But you guys can do a lot better than that. Hope it works out good for you. Thanks for coming on. Came in pros and cons on screen bottom boards from spring to fall. I live in Wisconsin, so would change out for winter. I have talked to a lot of beekeepers who are way north of me and north of you, and they run screen bottom boards, but they'll put an insert in during the winter and just to keep any strong winds from blowing through. I really don't know a lot about cold weather other than what I've been told from people who I believe know what they're talking about. But screen bottom boards, the reason I don't use them primarily is because they take more money and time to make, and they're not as durable. So if I'm moving them around, I think they're just not as strong as a solid wooden one. And I don't seem to have any problems with wooden ones. I think the advantages to a screen bottom board is if it's stinking hot, it does help cool a little bit. And primarily if I had it, it would be almost exclusively just for mite drop counts. But I just do alcohol washes. So we used to do screen bottom boards completely. I just don't see it really being that great of a benefit. I feel like our efforts are better suited elsewhere. There's nothing wrong with a screen bottom board. I know a lot of successful people who use them, but I just don't really see a place for them in our operation. They were extremely popular back 15, 20 years ago when I was a new beekeeper. They were more of a new thing then, and I just don't see a lot of professionals using them. And I went away from them, and I haven't seen any negative effects from going away from them. So maybe that answers your question. Okay, let's see. I'm in East Tennessee and may be interested in some nukes if you have some extras. Well, I may. I don't know. I posted it yesterday on my Facebook, and I thought, well, maybe we can get 10 nukes sold. And I think I got about 30 orders. Very close to it. And I've got the nukes to do about that many, but I can't handle much more than that. So we'll just have to see where we're at. But they all are very young queens. I think the oldest one in this group would probably be maybe 4 weeks. But that's good. They've had plenty of time to lay. I've had plenty of time to evaluate them, and they look amazing. Never seen a cage. Cayman, I'm pulling honey in southeast Georgia, considering requeening some older hives. Is this a good time of the year to do this? My 3rd year beekeeping, many thanks. It is a good time of the year to do this. Actually, one of the best times of the year to do this. It's typically been said that solstice queens are the best queens that you can raise. And I think there's a couple reasons for this dynamic. First of all, around the solstice, it's better queen rearing for the northern people and the southern people. So I think there's more of a consensus across the board because you start getting warmer weather up north as well. So you have more people agree on that. But I also think, especially in your area and mine, maybe less so yours because you're warmer than me, but you get a lot more consistent days. What do bees need to be able to get a queen mated and back to the hive? They need fair weather, they need warm weather, and they don't need a lot of, obviously rainy days and stuff like that. So I typically, once you start getting around June, you start running into typically less rain than April or May. And so June, great time to raise queens. I love June queens. Absolutely love them. Late May is good too, and early July. Great time to raise queens. So if you're going to do it, if you're raising queens or if you're requeening, great time of the year to do it. Let's see. What we got now, Chris? Here we go. Oh. What is that sheet under the top cover that some professional beekeepers use and its purpose? So that is Reflectix. It is what they use to insulate pipes and sometimes water heaters. You can find it at Lowe's or Home Depot, and you can find it on Amazon as well. It's Reflectix with an X at the end of it. And it is has the same insulative properties as a standard box thickness, which is 3/4 of an inch, but they, like 1 inch is what they call it. But so both are an R1 rating, so it doubles the insulative properties of your lid, or the top part of your hive. You got to inner cover even more. The main reason that a lot of guys use it is just because it reflects the heat down and has insulative properties. However, there's problems with it sometimes, and if you have a lot of ants, they will build in between your lid and that reflectix cover. That's the biggest negative I have towards it. If you're in an area where you have very humid winters, you may need to cut a notch in it if you want an upper entrance so that you can still get some of the reflective heat properties, but also let that moisture out. If you prefer that, I'm not an upper entrance guy, but I also don't live in Vermont, so that's basically how the reflectix thing works. First year beekeeper here, and just want to say thanks for your channel. I've learned a lot just watching you do your thing. Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate that feedback. We really do appreciate that a lot, and that's what we're here for, is to help and to make the transition better. Laurel and I both believe that one of the things that we struggled with unnecessarily early on was just some of the fundamentals, stuff that should have been universally well known in bee clubs, and it still was not available to us. And what little there was, for every good piece of information, it felt like there was 2 or 3 things that said something different or the complete opposite, and it was just very confusing. So we try to maybe over-try to focus on information that is really focused around great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition, and bring on guys like Bob Binney and people who are very successful. I believe this to be true, that if you want to be successful, you need to learn from the successful, and that's how I try to live my life. If you want to learn from people if you want to be happy, you have to learn from people who are happy, so we want you all to be successful, because I believe it makes sense that our industry will be more successful. So we're all working together. I'm just in we're all in different stages of learning, but I really don't think anyone should put me on a pedestal. 21 years, and you probably would be doing more stuff than I'm doing if you put the same amount of time in. But we appreciate you very much. So Shane Williams says, how do I get a Reynolds nuke if I live in Indy? So we do pick up only, and we just can't ship them, and we've never shipped them and really don't need to, and so that's the only way we do it. I know that's an inconvenience, but it makes it really easy on us, and it's hard to ensure. It's impossible to ensure high quality when you're dealing with the shipping companies. And sometimes they do their best, but it's just not good enough. Next question, Chris. How long do you keep frames in a deep freezer when you're finding beetle larvae? 2 days max. I typically do 24 hours, but a lot of times, just if I have the time, I'll just leave them in there until I'm ready to use them. Just make sure you let them thaw out and get a good room temperature before you throw them into a hive. But yeah, just 24 hours or so, maybe a little bit longer. I typically stay in for days. Hey, Cam, if you'd like to try out my auger-fed vaporizer this year, just reach out to me. I hope to have a few more made up soon and would like feedback from you. So I think maybe you did send that to me. It's really hard to remember everything, and I apologize. I forget a lot of names and forget a lot of products, and it's never intentional. It's just every day we're having to just learn something new, read something new, and a lot of times if I don't write it down, I forget it. Sorry. But yeah, that sounds interesting for sure, and I'd be interested to see that sucker work. Auger fed. Hey, Cayman, have you ever done pollination services for barter, or do you know the going rate for apple pollination? I don't know the going rate on that. I know guys that go to apple pollination. I haven't asked them in several years. I remember at one point it was, I want to say around $40, 45, 35. I really don't know what it's at right now, and maybe it's way up from that. That's been several years since last time I saw that. But I've never done pollination services before. I've just not really wanted to get into that. Definitely make sure that you're making money. Pollination is stressful on your bees. Just moving them is stressful. Sometimes it can be stressful with some of the sprays as well. So honestly, before I would do anything like that, I would see, John, if you could get a hold of somebody who actually has pollination experience, and that would be a great question for Bob Benny. Bob would know stuff about that. Bob's done a lot of pollination. I bet you Bob's done apple pollination, being as he was in Oregon for a while, and they have a lot of apple trees up in the Washington and probably some in Oregon as well. All right. Hey, I have carnies and I love them. Was thinking of adding Caucasian also. I hear they are great at wintering. I'm in Wisconsin. Thoughts? Hey, Brenda, good question. Unfortunately, I've never tried Caucasians. I've tried a little bit of Bob's Queens, but they weren't the ones that had a lot of Caucasian in them. It's very diluted, the ones that I got. They were still good Queens, but I haven't really tried anything with significant Caucasian, so I can't really tell you. Bob seems to think there's some merits to them, and Bob says something that's probably right, So, but if I was going to get some, I would try them from Bob if you could get them. It might be difficult this late in the game. Call their store and see if they have some. Getting them from other places could be good too. I just know guys like Bob go the extra mile with Queens, and it's that makes a big difference. Caucasians, I don't really have any experience, but I guarantee you, if they're mated good and they lay well, they'll probably do really good up there. Hey, Walter Reese, I want to say thanks for coming on, and also thank you for your donation. If you got a question, let us know, but thank you. Let's see here. All right, so Jason Egan says, how do you feel about making splits during the honey flow? Will it greatly impact honey production? It depends on the timing and how much you leave, right? And how big the split did you make? So I split every honey production colony this year, and I typically do in some form or fashion. I got a little bit more aggressive this year, and I still felt like I did pretty good. I didn't have to worry about swarming so much because I cut them back. Maybe I would have got a little bit more honey had I not done it, but I didn't have to work so hard trying to keep swarming under control. I also have a lot of combs. Combs makes a big difference. So something that my friend Gus Mitchell does, and now I'm doing, is we know when our honey flows start. We can kind of see the plants. We're out there every day kind of observing what the bloom's doing and when it's going to hit roughly. And so right before we think it's going to hit, just go in there and we just pull them all the way back to 4 frames of brood. So if there's 8 frames of brood in there, 4 of them go to a split. And I drop a queen cell in there, and we did that this year, had really good results. I had about 75% of the queens come back on them, but I made extras, and so any of those big splits that didn't work out, I had some smaller mating nukes that I was able to plug in and fix things. And those are working on drawing out their second deep box. And the original colonies that kept all the forager bees and had the laying queen, a lot of those are working on their third medium of honey. So some of them a little bit more than that, and some of them only have 2 mediums of honey. So, but this has not been the most stellar year. We've had a lot of cooler weather. So I think you can make splits during the honey flow, but timing is crucial, size of the colony, and oh, by the way, if it's at the end of the honey flow, let's say you're just a few weeks from the tail end of it, if you're pulling young stuff like frames of larvae and nurse bees, it will impact it, but not near as much. If you're leaving capped brood, and of course the forager bees are still in there, that's not going to impact it quite as much because it's the tail end of it, right? So you can, but if you get real aggressive, it's going to impact it. Timing. In your area, from time of the install of the package, how long would you expect before adding a second deep? Obviously, lots of variables. So, G-Light, if I get a package when I should here in Tennessee, which would be the first week of April, some years if it's a little earlier, you'll get it the last week of March. This year, it was even earlier. It was the second or third week of March they were bringing in packages up in here, which was shocking. And then it cooled down in April and slowed things. It was really interesting. However, let's just say you get one the first day of April, and it's got a viable queen. that's good. And she gets to lay in like crazy. And you're feeding them. You're helping them draw out these combs. You're not counting on Mother Nature. And with a package that doesn't have any combs, you need to be feeding them. They should draw out 4 to 5 frames pretty quick. And then they're going to slow down a little bit because those package bees are going to get old. And they've also maximized the cluster size that they have. And there's going to be some deaths. And that's why it's crucial, especially early on with the package, to feed, because eventually they're going to die off, and then the population is going to start going down. And until that brood emerges 21 days later after the queen's laid it, the population is not going up. But then on top of that, young bees aren't the best at comb drawing. They're actually very poor at it. Young bees are good at making brood. So you really want to get as much out of those package bees as you possibly can. And so as the population is starting to go up with the emerging brood, you have some old bee die off, and so that's why you really want to feed. But once you get to about 7 frames drawn and they're starting to work on the 8th frame, once you got 7 frames, go ahead, put your second deep on, unless there's a big cold snap coming in, like real cold. We're talking like highs in the 40s Fahrenheit. Go ahead and put your next box on. Pull up a frame of larvae or eggs, put it right above all the rest of the brood so that heat's moving up, and keep feeding. And do that well before they start getting packed down below, because a package will swarm in once it fills up that single. And you don't even want that swarming tendency to start. Another thing that helps is having some really good foundation that has a good wax coat. That makes a big difference on how quickly they draw it. If you see your foundations where they're drawing out just a little bit here, and they're drawing out some here and here, it's not a thick enough coat. Or the bees have a queen issue. When you get good drawn combs, it's because you have a good beeswax coat, you have a decent amount of nutrition coming in, nectar or sugar syrup, and you have to have a good, strong laying queen. If one of those things are missing, this isn't going to work out good. But a good wax coat is important. And it definitely helps speed things up. A good wax coat, they'll just like almost pull it all out evenly across the frame at the same time if it's a good coat. Hey, Merle Stone, haven't seen you on here in a while. Oh, well, that's what you say. Hey, Cayman, it's been a while. Researching an uncapping machine, 100 colonies or so. Any thoughts? Ooh. If you can find some of the used Silver Queen models, sometimes you can find a good deal on those Silver Queens. They're a great machine. And sometimes you can find them for $2,800, $3,000, and it's a little bit of an investment. But for 100 colonies or so, you're going to love that machine. And it'll uncap a box a minute, and that's going to really free up a lot of your time. The Cowan Silver Queens are a really good unit. You can use a Maxent chain uncapper. I know a guy who had over that amount that used that. It's just a lot more hands-on. Take the frame out, put it in, pull the lever, pull it out. And you also have created another problem now. You have slurry to deal with instead of an uncapping machine. So what I mean by that, folks, is when you're uncapping with a knife, you are getting 90% or more of the wax into a sheet, and it falls down into an uncapping tank. But if you're using a scratcher or you're using a chain uncapper, you are creating tons of tiny little pieces of wax, and now you're going to have a system that's going to be able to handle all of those tiny pieces of wax that as you filter that, strain it, whatever you want to call it. We don't filter ours to the point we lose pollen, but we definitely filter that much wax out of it. So that's something that I really prefer, the Silver Queen or a hot knife uncapper. 100 colonies, there are some other uncapping machines that are smaller, but the problem of it is there's not a really good mid-sized option. To buy a Silver Queen brand new is just high. So I would look for a used one of those if possible on a Kelly uncapping tank. If you could get that, sometimes you can find that rig for a reasonable price. You might have to drive for it. I'll let you know if I see one. I saw one the other day that was a really good price, but it was, I want to say California. It's a little ways away from where you are. I think you're in Maryland or something like that, Merle. Hope you're doing good. That's really all I know about automatic ones. Otherwise, you're hand uncapping, or you're using the Simply Harmony Farms. Boy, that's the hardest name to say in the world. I forget it every time. Roller, and we tried it out. My wife was uncapping with a cold knife at the time, and we got one to review. She just preferred the cold knife. She didn't like all the little pieces of wax. But a lot depends on preferences and what setups. I don't like tiny bits of wax all over the place. It drives me nuts. Hey, Cayman, I have bees in my maple tree that overwintered well. They were working strong early, then I saw very few. Now there are lots of activity. Again, what happened? Could it be that they swarmed out? It might be a small cavity in there, and they swarmed out for a little bit. Or it could be that maybe that time you saw them earlier, they were going through a period of orientation flights where they'll graduate several thousand foragers at a time. That usually happens after noon. I see the most of it around 2 to 3 p.m., especially if you get like 2 or 3 days of rain and then you go into a bee yard of like 40 colonies during that time. It looks like every colony is swarming for a little bit. It's really cool. Maybe that's what was going on. And now that, or maybe they swarmed out, now they've built back up again. That's probably what I would guess. Have the dates of Hive Life been out? So yeah, right now we are looking at, hivelifeconference.com. It'll take you there, but I've got to be careful. The other day I told somebody the dates from this year's. Yeah, so January 4th, 5th, and 6th at the Sevierville Convention Center. Tickets are not available right now. We are too busy with bees and all that kind of stuff, but we will try to get to that as soon as possible. And I promise we'll get that fixed in the future, but the business is just growing way too fast for my little brain to keep up with, and so that's why we're going to eventually be bringing on some help to help us manage all of these arms and legs of the business, because it's a lot. It's just too much. It's too much, but we're really looking forward to it. Hive Life's always a lot of fun. A lot of good friends and beekeepers that show up every year, and I love seeing them. Hey, thank you so much. I don't know how to pronounce your name. MCO Ram. Hey, Cayman, have bees in a maple tree. They were strong earlier, then I saw no bees. Now they attacked. Okay, this is what happened. So I really appreciate you sending me a donation. I think I answered this particular one. But that would be my guess. There are some, if you would like to try to catch them, there are some methods, especially on Bee Source. It's just bee and then the word source.com. And there's a couple techniques on there on how to make a funnel and other ways to lure the bees out if you're trying to do a trap out. That's what it is, a trap out. So if not, just enjoy watching them. I love seeing bees in trees. I saw one last year in a cedar tree. It didn't survive the winter, but the cavity size to me looked like it was maybe the size of a cantaloupe, and that's just really not ideal. Starting a new split, lots of the comb is empty at this time. Would this be a good time to use oxalic acid vaporizer, or is this too much for a new split? The biggest thing with the new split bandit is I don't want to do it when the queen's in a compromised state. So what I mean by that is maybe she's only laid a handful of eggs, and that doesn't really help glue the colony. That doesn't help solidify her presence. Once you start getting a bunch of young brood pheromones and they've hatched from eggs into a larva, then that really helps solidify things. So it's a really tight window. You don't want to treat too early because that queen's new, but you also don't want to let that brood get capped. What a conundrum. Tricky thing, these varroa mites. However, if you can wait, it takes 9 days from the time the queen lays the egg to cap the brood. So maybe you give her 6 or 7 days to lay, then do a light oxalic acid treatment. And that doesn't mean that all of the varroa mites are just going to go in the 10th day either. But you can do a light one then, maybe come back 2-3 days later, hit them again. I bet you'll clean up a good majority with that. But I wouldn't use it ever when there's a virgin queen in the colony. Hey, Cayman, is your favorite suit in the link to all your favorite items? is not. I really need to update all that stuff. There's a lot of things I need to do, but that suit is really, really nice. Um, Laurel left a link up above. Maybe, Chris, somebody can pull that and we'll put it back on down. Okay, I missed a question. Oh, this was one right here. So, Cayman, you should do an interview with Gus Mitchell. You're exactly right. Why have we not done that? Chris, why have we not done that? We're going to do that. Gus, if you're watching this, get ready. Go ahead and start drinking that lemon honey water and get that going. Get your voice ready. Cam, have you ever used Super DFM in your hives for exposure to pesticides as a nutritional benefit? Never have. We don't have really any agriculture sprays around here of any significance. There's some farmers doing cows, and that's about it. A little bit of corn every now and then. So we don't have a lot of issues with that. I've never seen the need for it. There's a lot of supplements out there, and I'm kind of the mindset that if I'm going to buy something like that, I'm probably going to go with something that targets their immune system more than an additive like that. So I don't live around corn country or agriculture like that with a lot of sprays. It could totally be great over there. I don't know, but no, I don't use it. Cayman, queen excluders, yes or no? Maybe. So I really like them. So yes, at the right time. Queen excluders are a great tool for not only honey production, if you know how to use them right, they're also really good for finding the queen. So if you have a double deep colony, you're wanting to make a split, but you're not good at finding the queen, there's a lot of bees in there. Well, what you do, what I personally would do is go in there and go, okay, here's half of this here's what I want to take, and here's what I want to leave. And then you separate them out with the excluder, and then you come back 5 days later, and whichever side has the eggs and the young brood down in there, that's the side that has the queen. And maybe she's on the wrong side, but at least now you've isolated her down to one box. So you can use a queen excluder for a lot of things. Don't leave them on during the wintertime, and don't use them with foundation. As far as if you have a brood chamber and now you're wanting to add foundations and get them to draw that, they don't like going through an excluder to get to foundations because they don't view those frames and that plastic or wax foundation as theirs. Once they start drawing comb on it, they'll go through an excluder really good, but they have to have time too. They cannot be backfilling the brood nest, and bees can't draw combs overnight, so excluders can be a really awesome tool. I would hate to run a beekeeping operation without one. You could do it, and I have done it. They're a very valuable tool to me. So Flower Street Farm says it really good right here. I've tried to age out my brood before adding queens. Recording dates on lids is super important to keep track. One of the things that we can do, I think, in the past, especially in the old literature, it's perceived as really bad to have a hive queenless for a long period of time. And for a very long period of time, that's true. But what if you make a split of young nurse bees? So if you make a split and you take it from the original colony, it's in the same bee yard, all the forager bees are going back anyways. So you've got nothing but young bees. But then you put nothing but, or the majority of capped brood, and you treat it immediately to get anything that you can, and then you order a queen to arrive 7 days later. So you have to plan this stuff out. But what you do is you go back in there 7 days later, and you make sure they're not raising any queen cells, because sometimes they'll be really runty, and you don't want to do that. So you would crush those, and a lot of the brood is emerged at this point, and now you can treat them again with oxalic acid vapor, and then give them a little feed and introduce the queen. And that is just going to crush the mite souls right there. And yes, you did have a hiccup in the brood period, and so it's going to take them a little bit longer to go as if you dropped a queen in there immediately, but you have a really clean hive with a young queen who has just this wonderful clean hive, and she'll just take off as long as she's a good one. getting those mites down in July and August is so huge. It makes a big difference. Honey production goes way up on colonies that have low mite loads going into honey production. There's a lot of times the mites are affecting us, and the colonies are still good looking, and we don't realize it. Hey, Kane, what's the average amount of honey do you get from a 2-year-old hive? That's a tricky question to answer. I typically, like, if you're talking about a 2-year-old queen or 2-year-old hive, a lot depends on your location. In Tennessee, though, let's say I start a nuke this year, get them up, overwinter them good. They're a good, strong, healthy colony, and I don't have combs, I could probably get 2 medium supers if they had to draw them out. It's also tricky to keep them from swarming if I don't have combs. But if I can keep them from swarming, decent year, 2 mediums. If I get a decent year and I have drawn combs, I can get up to 4 mediums, and that's over 100 pounds. So we like to say, and this is true, we average over a 10-year period a minimum of 80 pounds per honey production colony and sell a nucleus colony off of it. That's how we make our money. But if we have a decent year, we're going to make 100 pounds because we take all the honey. And maybe the ethics behind that aren't good for some people. But we have no qualms with doing that. We take it all the honey away in June, and then we feed them really well. That keeps them drawing combs, gets them going, and then we leave all the fall honey for the bees. In some places, the fall honey is bad for bees to overwinter on. Boy, life is complicated. Let's see. Lots of questions to get to. Boom, boom, lots of questions. Should I be doing a mite wash on your swarms? You'll learn a lot from it. You certainly will. But if it's a swarm and they're broodless, just stick a sticky board underneath if you have one. That would be like a screen bottom board. If you have that set up, put your little insert down in there with some canola oil, some oil on top, and treat with oxalic acid. I've had buddies do that on broodless swarms and just had like 700, 800 mites or more fall off down on that sticky board. And it was an awesome thing to do because now those colonies are so relieved and unburdened, they're just able to really take off and perform at a wonderful level. How many more weeks of honey flow do you have in Tennessee? In this part of Tennessee, I'd be shocked if we had more than 2 weeks, the way things are going. So that's it. And we're already starting to see some robbing in the evenings, light robbing, not very aggressive. You leave out a frame, you see about 1,000 or so bees around it. That's light robbing in a yard of 40 colonies. If we did that in July, you would not be able to see the frame or the box probably. There's just so many bees out. Can't even count them. So if you have anything to pull, you could go ahead and pull it now, and so you're not pulling off during robbing season. That's what we're talking about right now, if we can find the time to be able to pull most of our honey supers before robbing starts. Yeah, Zach, the Hawaiian beekeeper, saying doing a western a week right now. Ugh. So a western is a term for the medium-sized supers. Or no, you're doing the ones that are a little bit like an inch thicker. Is that right, Zach? Either way, that's too much honey, and I know that you're suffering over there in Hawaii. It's terrible. I pity you so much. Yeah, 80 pounds apiece on per honey production colony. We can do better than that, but that's kind of what we base what we need to make a profit. 80 pounds of honey per honey production colony and sell 1 nuke. And that's the minimum. That's the baseline of what we have to be able to run the business and pay the bills. But we can do better than that, especially in a good year. All right, Cayman, new beekeeper here. Start with 4 nukes. What's the mite treatment you would recommend to use around August? I live close to you. So there's a lot of different things that you can use. Apiguard, Thymol works pretty good. Just follow the instructions. Make sure that you have a little space up above. They can grab it and haul it down. So if you don't have a rim or space, you could just use an extra box. If you have a medium box that you're not using, just take the frames out of it. Or even Leave a couple of the frames in it, but I'd just take it out, leave it on there during the treatment. Once the treatment's over, take it off. You just want to have enough space for formic or apiguard to be able to off gas. The bees have enough room to circulate that, and also to be able, with the thymol, to be able to grab it and pull it down. If you have the lid too close, they can't grab it, and it affects the uh, effectiveness of the treatment. Now, efficacy, that was the word I was looking for. Yeah, the $10 word. Now, apiguard, in my experience, I just can't seem to, on an average, I can get sometimes where I can get like a 90% kill on some colonies, but over like a 40 colony average, like in the research test yard, I never can get it above low 80% effectiveness. So I was looking at some research not too long ago from some universities, and they were showing a lot of the same thing, high 70s, low 80s effectiveness with apiguard. So I don't know if that's universal, but that seems to be what I get out of it. And I think that's part of the reason why I treat in June and I treat in August. It's probably overkill, late August or early September. But I like overkill. I like low mite loads and big bees, and bees that look great. Bees that need to be split in August. I had that problem last year, and that was kind of a good problem, but it was a problem still, because I was like, doggone, these things are going to swarm in fall if we have a decent fall flow. So we had to go in and pull a frame or two of brood and just make a bunch more splits. I bought some queens from Michael Palmer, and those did really good. Worked all the way around. So that, you can use oxalic acid vapor, but I just heard this the other day, and I'm sorry if anyone disagrees with this, but there's still this circulating message that one oxalic acid vapor a week for 3 weeks will reduce the mite loads good enough. And if you're expecting a 90% kill out of one treatment of oxalic acid per week for 3 weeks, you're mistaken. That just does not work that way. It's not just us. It's backed up by monstrous amounts of research now. That's what we thought back when we didn't understand the treatment. What they're finding now and what's being debated is it breaking down within the first half hour? And it's pointing towards that it starts breaking down on the bees' bodies within 30 minutes. So that's still yet to be peer reviewed and all that kind of stuff, but it's a quick flash treatment. And we have done this over the course of multiple years. 5 rounds of oxalic acid vapor, 21 days, 60% kill at best. Can't get higher than that. Most of the time, 50, 60%. Which does affect things, but that's not good enough to overwinter your bees and get them very, very strong. We want awesome bees going into winter. So oxalic acid vapor has serious limitations, and that is one of the reasons why we try to have carnies, because they shut down in November. So I can get a brood break, and the oxalic acid works really good. Italians will run brood into December in Tennessee. And so we're using the bees for that. Or we'll make those smart splits, and we will make one side of it without any calf brood, and we'll use it. So mites are a complicated problem. And it's not that you can't handle it, but most people underestimate it. And it's different, because if you're in Wisconsin, you have a very short season, you're not going to raise near as many mites as that guy in Georgia. Half as many. So you might be able to get by with one treatment a year at the end of your season, and then an oxalic acid cleanup. Works good for you. You tell your buddy down in Florida that, he's going to lose his shirt. So alcohol washes, nobody likes doing them, but they tell you a lot. More than anything else we have right now. So doing some of those periodically throughout the season, it will teach you a lot of things. Cayman, I have 5-year-old honey supers that were in storage. They are clean, but the comb is brittle. Should I use this or start over with new foundation? If it's brittle, but it's still intact, just baby it. And if you put it on during a flow, the bees will let you know really fast. Put it on, come back 5 days later. If they're going to use it, it'll be in good condition. If not, they'll beat it up. Combs are worth a lot. And I put on some pretty brittle stuff, and sometimes they'll chip a little bit of it off, and then they'll build off of it. So 5-year-olds, not that old. Just give it a shot. Throw it on a good colony during a honey flow. I bet they'll work it. Cayman Reynolds, Tennessee's bees. What should someone do if they bought a package and found lots of varroa and deformed wing with the packaged bees? Well, unfortunately, start treating. It's a problem, and it happens from time to time. And sometimes it's a fluke. Sometimes it's universal. But when you produce bees that have varroa, sometimes you end up with a concentrated amount, and maybe most of their packages are clean, and they ended up with one like this. But I would be pretty disappointed, and we have had that instance happen one time since we've been selling nukes, and refunded the person for that. We had people that were washing them and not having issues. So that's, unfortunately, it's agriculture, and those things happen, but need to get some treatment going. If you got some oxalic acid, maybe treat them every other day with a light treatment for a little while and try to knock those numbers down. OA dribble any better than vape? This is really a topic of pretty significant debate, and all I can tell you is my experience when it comes to this. I think it works a little bit better. I think it's pretty easy to determine that as far as effectiveness, because it lingers around in the hive longer. Oxalic acid vapor, more and more we study it, we find that it breaks down very, very quickly. And I don't think oxalic acid vapor kills more than what's exposed immediately at the treatment. So if there's mites emerging out that evening after the treatment, let's say you do in the morning that evening, I think a lot of those don't get killed unless they crawl over on a bee that still has some on it. But it's a one-day kill, in my opinion, at best. The oxalic acid dribble, you can go in there 2 days later and you'll still see some residues, because it's in a liquid form, mixed with either with glycerin, vegetable glycerin, or a sugar syrup solution, and that stuff can stick around for a few days. And I've literally gone in 3 days later and still found some of the residue, and it's still sticky and tacky. And so I think it's more effective. However, because it's more effective on the mites, it can be a little bit more hard on the bees. And so I would be really careful with over applying it, being very accurate with it. And Randy Oliver has information at scientificbeekeeping.com. Oxalic acid vapor is good. There's nothing wrong with it. But if I had to say that you can only use one, and someone's going to do it for me, and we want to go for the most kill in one shot, I would think that the dribble would work better. I don't know that for a fact, but it's also stinking cheap. You get oxalic acid, and then you get a syringe for $1, and your oxalic acid's super cheap if you maybe don't and then you mix this stuff up, and now instead of having to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars, you've got a setup that works for a nickel a treatment. But again, it really only works significantly good when there's no brood in the colony, or no capped brood. So again, limited, but it's a very common treatment in many parts of the world, not named the U.S. And a lot of commercial beekeepers still do it in the U.S. George Hart, thank you so much. Appreciate you, sir. Have you ever experimented with the extra tall brood box frames, 16 to 18 inches, made by Bill Erpel in Georgia, or Jim at Vino Farms in Massachusetts? Natural circular shapes of bees help survive winter. I have not really fooled with it. I've studied a lot of stuff, observed and talked to some people who have fooled with it. There's a guy down the road, a friend of mine, and he has run some of those long ones, like the lay-ins that are really long, for years. And really nice guy. He struggles to keep bees in those hives, because we produce a lot of varroa in Tennessee. And if you can keep a good queen in there that's pumping out a good population, good nutrition, and you don't have mite problems or any type of problems like that. I mean, I was talking to a 17-year-old kid in Maine that got down to -40 this year. He doesn't even wrap them. and he had bees over winter up there, but they were in good shape. So that's the way I look at it. That's the most important thing. Hive design can be beneficial. I do agree with that. But I think that's a secondary or third thing to look at. I think people doing different styles of hives are very cool. And I never want it to be said that I'm against folks doing lay-ins or AZ hives or Jim Vino's different style of hive. However, the fundamentals are still the same in any type of the hive. Got to have those great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition. So I don't really have a lot of experience. I think you could have a ton of fun with those. Does it help out? It very possibly could alleviate some of the stress. But I think that's probably down the list a little bit on what's going to help the most. But I would love to hear more from you if you go down that road, and I'd love to hear of your success with those. Had a difficult swarm today / yesterday, 30 feet in a tree, and so you actually took the time to climb up there and get that. We'll just call you Zacchaeus instead of Nuts and Bolts Beekeeping. Well, 30 feet in a tree, I got to say, I did that last year. It was a hickory tree. It was a good tree. That was a strong tree. Laurel said I was going to break my neck, and I did not, see? So, however, that was a big swarm. It was like 8 or 9 pounds. It was massive, maybe the biggest I've ever caught, and I wasn't letting that thing go. Hope you got it. Just be careful. Hey, Cayman, I thought mites liked drone brood, then why a 21-day cycle and not a 24-day cycle? Good question. So that's, right? So one of the things that I've contemplated is this 21-day cycle the right idea? And a lot of it depends on the time of the year. If you have a lot of drones in the colony, then that's going to be the sink for the mites. They're going to be in that. So you could go in there and scrape a lot of it up and expose them. However, when we do a lot of our late treatments in the year, there's not as many drones. And this is the way I kind of look at it too. Not the whole period, not the whole gestation cycle is capped. Why are we even looking at 21 days, even if it's just worker brood? They're only capped for like a 13-day period, 12 and a half, something like that. So would it be better not to crush their souls for 14 days than trying to cover a 21-day period? Because if we do a good job over that whole capped brood period, if we get the first initial exposure, bam, then if we can cover the next 14 days very effectively, well, then as everything's emerging out, we just thrash it. Now, drones are slightly different, but I think 21 days is just kind of become like the rule of thumb. Kind of like doing 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 sugar syrup. There's all kinds of wiggle room in there, but that's just kind of like the standard way that it's been taught. So, yeah, I think we definitely need to view Varroa in different ways, and we need to be using not just treatments. I got to be careful because you're supposed to follow the label, but I find that some of these things, usually using them at different frequencies, actually gets me better results than what they say. And unfortunately, even if I did have solutions for you, some of those could get me in really big trouble to share them. Thought I had them yesterday. Queen must have been in the tree as they were back in the tree today. Cut the branch off, decided I needed a boom truck. Yeah, you need something for sure. Just be careful. 30 feet up's a long way to fall. But I hope you get them. I know that frustration. HD Honeybee. Hey, from Michigan. What is the ratio of wax for painting on my boxes? I just got new boxes and would like them to last. So we don't paint them on. We cook them. So we have a wax dipping tank that is about 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's microcrystalline and paraffin 50-50 mixture, and we'll cook them for 15 minutes. And it heats them up, forces the water out in the air, and that microcrystalline paraffin mixture just vacuums right in. I just don't think that you could. You just can't paint them on, unfortunately. I wish it was that easy. Painting them will work really good. You just got to make sure that you seal everything. Taking the time to really get all the end grain of the boxes, the top and bottom lips, and not just one coat, but getting, if possible, a primer coat. That primer coats really do what they're supposed to do, and they hold that paint on there well and really combine the two together and make it last longer. And then, I mean, put 3 coats on. That's typically what we do is we'll put the primer coat on, and then we'll do all the sensitive parts 1 coat, and then we'll do the whole box again. And if we're going to paint, and it's a lot of extra work, but if you come back and repaint them eventually again, you can get painted boxes to last a significantly long time too. But why do that when you can wax tip? Rylan, thanks for coming on and supporting us yet again. Caught my first swarm a few days ago. Not sure if it was one of mine or a wild one. It landed a couple yards from my hives and was 2 feet off the ground. Well, first swarm is always one to remember. I definitely remember the first one, and it was from one of my colonies. However, I dropped it into a single brood chamber, and they drew that out like crazy. And then they drew the second box out, and I got a bunch of nice new comb out of that. It was amazing to see a swarm in action. They just were tearing through the work. Okay, so we have caught up to a lot of questions here. We're going to run to 9 o'clock, so we got about 16 minutes to go. We'll get some more questions, so if you got some, throw them on in. I am checking my messages from Laurel and all the people who are smarter than I. All right, yep, all right. Cayman, have an overwintered hive. Queen is a rock star right now, but her wings are half chewed up. Should I keep her? This is her second season. So if she is a rock star, keep her, but plan on her expiring. So you have probably great nutrition coming in. It's prime time. I'm looking at your picture. It looks like there's snow and you're in a colder area than me. So it's prime time. She's going to probably wear herself out over this period. And when it comes to the dearth, most queens, when they're superseded, it is right after the honey flow. And all of a sudden, nutrition drops. There's a little bit of robbing. That's stress. And the queen's production drops. They're tired. They take a little break. And that's the trigger a lot of times to requeen. So I would probably expect that queen to be retired this year, either by you or by the bees. So maybe plan on making a split at some point. Have a queen either ordered, or maybe you have a colony that makes a queen cell, and you just go ahead and set that in a nuke or a couple nukes with some cells and see if you can get some backup queens. It's always good to have some young queens ready to roll. Probably got her wings tore up in the process of maybe coming back from a mating flight or something like that, or during introduction, because sometimes introductions can be rough, and maybe the majority of the hive likes her. It could be 80%, 90%. But if a handful of bees get a hold of her that don't accept her immediately, they'll rough her up a bit. The other ones protect her after a little bit, so she's saved and she works out like that one does. But she still can get pretty roughed up. And I think that's why sometimes you see some queens with almost no wings, really tattered wings, and also you'll see some that are missing a leg or part of the end of a leg, and that can happen during introduction, or a virgin coming back in and just something happens. A lot of things that happen, we just don't know. Going to try to get a swarm out of a chimney. Would a leaf blower be too aggressive? I can adjust speed pretty well. So is it a swarm hanging on a chimney, or does it actually have comb in there and stuff like that? Because I don't know how well a blower would work if there is combs and they're in there really good. I don't really know that situation. And I don't really do cutouts. I avoid it like the plague. Randy McCaffrey, that crazy guy, would be the one to talk to. He's got the 628 Dirt Rooster channel. How can you cut down mold in your top feeder? I'm new at beekeeping. Any help is appreciated. That's a great question. Top feeders, bucket feeders, feeders that bees can't really gain a lot of access to, you get this mold in it. Boy, it drives me nuts. It doesn't really hurt the bees so much, but it does ferment your syrup faster, which makes to a degree, less quality feed for your bees, obviously, but maybe you end up having to throw it out because it just gets so bad they won't take it. And so you have to either one, put something in the feed to prevent that. You could put something like Hive Alive that has thiamol in it. There's some other products out there that have essential oils that'll cut that down. But the thing of it is, if it's good at killing fungus and bacteria, it's also pretty good at killing fungus and bacteria in bees' guts too. And there's been some research come out show that these products are good at being indiscriminate killers of killing good and bad flora in bees' guts. So that's one of the reasons why I try not to use it. And I also use frame feeders that the bees get complete access to, and some people don't like them, and that's fine. To each their own. But my bees can get down into it, and they can clean it out. And I never clean my feeders because unless something weird happens, like that small hive beetles take over or something like that. And they're cheap, but you're going to have to do an additive to keep that down. You're going to have to put something in there. Complex issues. Even if they take the syrup down fast and it's not fermented, the residues left in the top feeder will still ferment and give you that mold. It's just a pain. Jason Powell, hey man, I've been making your latest pollen patty recipe and they dry out super fast. I do everything to the T except I mix with the drill. Do you think the drill is causing air to get mixed in and dry out fast? I don't think so. I use a drill a lot of times for my pollen patty recipe. For any of the recipes, I use a drill. So that is the problem with using a sugar-based recipe. The oil helps. It's not glycerin. The gelatin can help, but the problem of it is they still have a propensity to dry out. So the bees have to take them fairly quickly and keep at it. It's cheaper, and so you can afford a certain degree of loss. What'll typically happen if you have a strong colony that's hungry, like pre-spring, and you throw it on in late February, and they just go at it. And so it doesn't hardly have time to dry out because the bees are getting to it almost as fast as it can begin to dry out. And in February, it's pretty humid. I mean, we get a lot of rain in February and stuff like that, and the bees are fairly humid themselves. But if the ones that don't get to it fast, it will dry out, and they'll chuck that stuff to the wayside. We store it in a Ziploc bag or something like that to where it can't get any air to it in the meantime. It's a big pain in the rear end, but it saves you a lot of money versus having to ship a bucket of syrup. So if you can get syrup, though, maybe we'll have that at Hive Life this next year, anyone who comes. Maybe we can figure out how to get some bulk syrup there where you can get some really nice pricing on that because it makes a big, big difference. One of the things you guys can do if you have the time, get you some combs drawn. The honey flow's done. Quickly get those supers off and maybe get an extra box of foundation drawn and just feed them and feed them and feed them and get that second deep or third deep or whatever one you're going for. Get it just full of sugar syrup and let the bees thicken it for you. And once they've inverted it, now you've got basically the same thing that is Pro Sweet, except better. And you have to extract it, but now you'll make some prime pollen patties with that. There's always an easy answer to everything, Jason, don't you know? Have you tried Russians in your area? What do you think of them? Well, they're always in a hurry, but there are some issues. I actually have only tried Russians a little bit. And Gus Mitchell, he has a YouTube channel, and he definitely would be the knowledgeable guy on Russians. Him and Billy Joe, I know, redneck territory. They're both great beekeepers and good guys. But they both run Russian-type bees. I tend to find they're a little bit more aggressive, and I don't really care for that. They also are a lot more sensitive, even than carnies, to flows, build up, and flow stops and shutdowns. And so you have to manage them like a fine-tuned race car. There's some advantages to that, and there's some disadvantages to that. And I think there's some hardiness factors there and benefits. There's always pros and cons. There's some people that really, really like them. I prefer carnies, but I think you can make any bee work for you. I think you'll just need a full bee suit to work them. How do wild bees deal with mites and sickness? Most of them die. Bees, back even prior to mites and small hive beetles, have had a very poor success rate, but that was okay. We got to also know that bees are also an invasive species, so it's not necessarily natural that they thrive here. The reason they thrived in the U.S. is when they were brought over here, they managed to be able to separate the wax moths and a lot of the diseases that they had. So they brought them over here, and they just thrived because there wasn't really any competition, and they were able to get rid of a lot of the maladies that they were facing over in Europe. Well, eventually, those things made it over here. And by the time the wax moths were reintroduced into the bees, they really struggled with it for a period of time because they had lost those tendencies. But wax moths are totally easy to handle. They're a soft-bodied creature they can kill. And they can yank their eggs out, and they can bully them at the entrances. But that was a problem for a little while. And when they did a survey, the USDA did this back, if I remember correctly, I got this information saved somewhere, but I'm pretty sure it was the 70s. They found that out of 6 swarms that left, out of 6 first-year swarms, only one of them survived till the next year. That's just how nature plays game. This was before small hive beetles. This was before varroa. This is before a lot of things, and you could argue there was better forage and habitat back in those days. So it is not natural for bees to survive at a high rate, even if you don't take into the new accounts of varroa mites. But varroa mites did something that nothing else had ever done before. It spread viruses extremely good. A lot of these viruses were already around, but the bees very rarely came down with it because they had developed mechanisms to reduce transmission from one bee to the other. However, now you insert the bloody syringe, and varroa mites are injecting this in. So according to most researchers and educators, the wild bee population was all but wiped out when varroa came over. And so you could argue there's technically no true wild bees. I don't know if that's quite the case. The whole deal with like the Arnott forest bees and some of the bees, that's been debunked by some other researchers. They still struggle with mites. But they can survive. Here's how it goes, basically. And David Peck gives the best explanation of this, and I might be botching it. The bees that are going to survive are the ones that are going to swarm, and they are going to keep small populations, and they don't need all of them to survive. Most of them will die. If they send out 6 to 7 swarms, and one of them makes it, it's going to be probably small. It's going to be hardy. It's going to be tough, but it's not going to be anything like you or I want to keep, because it just doesn't have those characteristics. And there's still a lot of them going to die. And the right conditions still have to persist because there has to be the right cavity size defined. There has to be the right nutrition. So it's a very complicated problem. But wild bees struggle with mites still, and there is no immune bees as far as I'm concerned. There's things that can help, but it's a complicated issue, and it's not going away anytime soon. If anything, if history has shown us anything, it is going to get more complicated, and I hope it's not anytime soon. Does replacing the queen typically work to calm an angry hive? It takes some time, Jim, because that queen that's giving those genetics out, it takes 21 days for her eggs to turn over into adult bees, but then those adult bees are going to be around for a little while. So it's going to take a couple brood cycles. That queen's going to have to come on in, lay for a bit, and those old bees are going to have to die off. So it's going to be a little while, probably about 2 months, month and a half minimum. It's going to take a little while. Hey, Chris, with ECP, Bees, Coins, and Prospecting. Thank you, sir. Cayman and I have seen some beekeepers use from broodcomb that's been treated with mite treatments for honey frames to extract and consume. Thoughts? Depends on what it is. If it's formic acid, of course, different. If it's oxalic acid, different. If it's something even like thymol and hasn't been treated for a really long time, I have no problems with that personally. But if we're talking something like Apivar, which is active ingredient amitraz, or if we're talking a fluvalinate or coumaphos, apistan, checkmite, that kind of stuff, any type of synthetic, I think that's an issue. I don't want that stuff in my food. I don't want it in my hives. So I think it depends on what it is. I don't really want brood combs that have had a lot of brood. If there's just been a little brood, like a round or two, I personally don't find that to be a problem. I don't think it's best, but sometimes things happen. I've had some queens where they've requeened during the honey flow. The virgin queen's thin when she comes back in, goes through the excluder, and she'll lay into some first year or second year honey supers and lay one cycle through it. I'm still going to use that for honey supers. Yeah, they get a little bit dark, but it's all they're going to do is pack it with some propolis and stuff, and there's a little bit of residue of pupal casings, but it's from the bees, so I really don't see that as a problem. But yeah, if it's got any of those synthetics, personally, I don't want anything to do with that. But if it's some of the natural stuff, oxalic acid, by the way, everybody, is legal to use with honey supers on in the U.S., but it's supposed to be the apabioxyl legal treatment. You can get that from Better Bee. But yes, you can use oxalic acid with honey supers on. There's a lot of brood in the colony. You're going to have to use a lot of treatments just to get things where you want them to be. Let's see. So many with fish pictures. Yeah, someone needs to take me on a fishing trip. I actually don't fish very much, but a little bit of dynamite and a pond where they can't get away, I can do some serious damage. Hey, Pamela, thanks for coming on. My daughter just got a hive yesterday. I don't know the ins and out of it. I did share your channel with her. Well, thanks for sharing that, Pamela, and I'm sure she can be very successful. There's a lot of learning curves to anything. If she took up golf or she took up collecting, oh, goodness, I don't know, something, marbles, for example. There's always a lot to learn with any new venture, and I'm sure that if she applies herself, she will be very successful. The best part about bees, though, is it goes well beyond just a hobby. Your bees are going out there and you're helping plants perform better. And when they reproduce more seeds, you're creating food for mammals. You're also creating seeds for birds and other small mammals. You're creating food for things. You're creating more productivity for plants. You're creating food for humans. I think honeybees is one of the greatest things people can get involved into. And honey is the first thing that we think of. But beeswax, you can make so many cool things with it. Beeswax, when it melts and burns in your house, it actually kills toxic substances that are in the air. It purifies the air. It neutralizes them, I should say. And also, it's safe to eat. I don't eat beeswax. It's not the tastiest thing in the world. I will eat it with like comb honey. And pollen is so underutilized in propolis. There's so many awesome products from the hives that bees make for everybody. So I hope that she has a great time with it, and I hope that if she needs anything, she'll hop on maybe one of our live chat and ask a few questions. I guess I don't know how old she is, so maybe you'll ask them for her. But best of luck, and we definitely like to see young beekeepers get into beekeeping. That's the future. Show us your marble collection. I've lost all my marbles, man. I don't know where they are. Hey, Dave Dwyer, thanks for coming on, buddy. We appreciate you being a frequent follower and for supporting us so much. Good luck with your bees, man. Hey, Cayman, your channel's been a great resource for me and has helped me grow my apiary from 1 to 3 hives to up to 10. Do you make nukes during dearth with a pollen patty and sugar syrup? So, hey, that's awesome. We want to hear people enjoying bees more and having success. I'm so thrilled to hear yours. It really is awesome. So, yes, we do feed sugar syrup and pollen patties. If you're in a dearth period and you're trying to draw a comb, it really matters to have some good wax on your foundation. Big difference. So there's companies that will give you thick wax on there. I think Premier does as good a job as any on getting a good wax coat on there. But I've purchased some like single coat right cell before from Man Lake, and I just feel like that's not thick enough. It's just not thick enough for what I want. So we've been applying more. That really helps to get our bees to draw more comb, get those resources for next year. And yes, we are going to keep those mites low, and we are going to feed small amounts of pollen patty even during our summer dearth. We have people in Tennessee say, don't do that, Cayman. You'll kill your bees. I keep looking at my bees, waiting for them to die. And we definitely feed sugar syrup. Bees are not unlike any other creature, and when they have optimum optimum nutrition, they perform very well. That is one of the reasons why I really focus on giving them those supplements during a dearth. The bees will live longer, they'll produce more of them, and then when we hopefully hit that elusive fall flow, we'll have more girl power to be able to bring that in and get more of the real stuff so they can head into winter healthier. So sometimes I feel like people are saying feeding the unnatural is bad for bees, like sugar syrup and pollen patties. I find my bees perform better with it. And not everybody has to use it. You have to be careful. Small hive beetles can be a problem, but yeah, we really we push them hard. I'm starting to feed a little bit of pollen patties to the little splits that we're trying to grow into doubles between now and the end of the season, and we're starting to feed them sugar syrup. Don't ever let that momentum slow down. Baby them. I feel like most people are about 15 to 20% away from reaching high levels of success. Usually there's about a 15-20% gap that they leave, that if they would have just done a little bit more or added this over here, they would get what they wanted. That's been my experience, at least. Well, whew. There's a fella that jumped on recently, first time on a live. Can a mating nuke work only 1 to 2 frames of bees, so in a 5-frame nuke? So I'm going to answer this. As a great question, useful for anybody on here who's wanting to make some splits of their own with either queen cells that are in a colony, maybe from a supersedure, or a swarm that's happening. You're trying to give yourself some backup. So let's say you have a colony swarm and there's 15 cells in there. Well, only one queen is going to come back into that colony. So most of those cells are going to be by one of the other queens or something. You can make some splits. And the question is, can you put like 1 to 2 frames of bees in a 5-frame nuke? In a dearth period, it is difficult to leave them super weak. You can do it, but you have to be careful. Typically, if we're going to have them pretty weak, we don't leave them in yards where there's like strong, powerful, double deep colonies. The pressure is just too much. So we'll move them a couple miles away, 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. Plus, that'll get us more drones in the area too. But I think for a mating nuke, it's good to give them 1 frame of brood, the adhering bees, a frame of food, and a shake of bees in a 5-frame nuke. So what we want to have is about the equivalent of 3 frames of bees, 1 frame of brood. It doesn't be quite this strong. Minimum of 2 good frames of bee coverage. Anything that has brood or resources has to be not covered just a little bit. It has to be covered good. And I personally feel like we want a little excess for 2 reasons. We want enough bee power to be able to leave covering that and be able to forage, because if they can't maintain the temperatures and guard it properly, they can't go forage until that brood has graduated, and that's going to be a while. And we also want to have extra bee power to be able to expand and draw foundation and be able to grow. We want excess. So that's kind of what I want in a mating nuke, and that's why I've gotten away from doing so many 2-frame, like you see these little 2-frame mating nukes on YouTube, and they're either wanting to swarm out of it or they're wanting to die in them. There's just not enough room for a healthy maintaining for a decent bit of time. They're either wanting to swarm out because they're too good, or they're dying in them because they're just too weak. So personally, I think a 5-frame nuke, keep it simple. I've tried little mating nukes. I've tried all kinds of hive figurations for mating nukes. Keep it simple, stupid, like my dad always told me. 5-frame nukes are great for a lot of things. You can overwinter in 5-frame nukes. You can do a lot of things with 5-frame nukes. So, or just have a Jester nuke box. So make them in 5-frame nukes. If the queen comes back and starts laying good, throw in some foundations, throw in some combs, feed them. So you don't have to get real fancy. I've really gotten away from all the fancy mating nuke stuff. It's not like they don't work, but I hate different frame sizes. Keep it simple. Keep it easy. Keep it to where you can just take those deep combs and throw them right back into a colony that's gone queenless and fix that. We do it all the time. Jay, I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate everybody coming on. We're going to have another live chat here in the future and maybe bring on a person of interest as well. And maybe Gus Mitchell will be one of them. I hope you guys have a great vacation weekend for those of you guys who get to enjoy that. Thanks to our military personnel. Thanks to everybody again for your support, and we will be talking soon. Thanks. We'll see you in the next video.